Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today we're tackling a topic that sounds maybe a bit technical at first glance, but trust me, it holds a really crucial key to understanding our energy future. We're diving into a recent paper titled The Impact of Spatial Representation in Energy Transition Modeling on System-Wide Energy Return on Investment. Now, what this study really explores is how the way we sort of draw the map for our energy systems profoundly affects what we expect from clean energy. Our big plans for, 100% renewable future may be based on an overly optimistic picture.
Indeed, and this study drills right down into a fundamental concept in energy analysis, energy return on investment, or EROI.
EOI, right.
Think of it simply as the ultimate efficiency metric. How much usable energy do we actually get back for every unit of energy we put in to build and operate a system?
Okay.
So if our models, the tools we use for planning, aren't capturing reality accurately, well, it raises a pretty significant question.
Yeah.
Are we making critical decisions based on incomplete or possibly even skewed information?
That's a bit of a terrifying thought. So our mission today is to explore what this study found. We want to help you understand why a seemingly small detail like spatial representation in energy modeling can have massive real-world implications. We're talking system costs, technology choices, and ultimately how smooth, or maybe how challenging, our transition to 100% renewable energy might truly be.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this idea of spatial representation first. When we talk about shifting to renewables, especially wind and solar, these are weather-dependent sources. Obvious, maybe, but crucial.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just put a wind farm anywhere, right? You need wind
Mm-hmm.
or enough sun for solar panels. The study highlights that understanding these ever-shifting load patterns originating from geographic differences is absolutely critical for a reliable system.
It is. But modeling vast regions, say all of Europe, with all their local nuances, like how much wind blows in coastal Spain versus inland Germany, it's computationally very challenging. It takes a lot of power.
Right.
And this leads to a common simplification. It's known as spatial aggregation.
Spatial aggregation. Okay.
If we zoom out a bit, most energy models, they simplify things. They treat large areas, maybe an entire country or even the whole continent, as just one single combined node.
One node, like one big energy blob.
Pretty much, yeah. They sum up capacities and demands, apply weighted averages for things like wind speed or sunshine across the whole area. Now, this study points out that while aggregation definitely simplifies the calculations, it leads to a loss of weather-dependent and geographic characteristic variations, which means the model's results can be, and I'm quoting here, partially distanced from the real system. It's a trade-off, computational feasibility versus accuracy.
Okay, so it's like trying to predict traffic in London by just looking at the average speed across the entire UK.
That's a good analogy, yeah.
You'd completely miss the M25 jams at rush hour and the empty roads up in the Highlands.
Exactly.
So that's what spatial aggregation does for energy models. It smooths out all the local peaks and valleys, the sunny spots, the windy coasts, the big cities needing power.
It averages them out.
That really sounds like a problem, especially when the goal is a reliable, secure system that keeps the lights on 24/7.
It is. A secure system needs a well-planned grid, coordination, storage, flexibility. If your model glosses over the local realities that drive the need for those things, well, that's a fundamental issue.
Definitely. Okay, before we get into the study's results, let's just quickly revisit EROI, make sure we're all clear. You said energy output divided by energy invested.
Correct.
The paper makes it clear EROI isn't just, another number on a spreadsheet. It's framed as the ultimate measure of whether an energy system can actually power itself and society sustainably.
Precisely. It's not just about the financial cost, which is important, of course, but about the net energy. Does the system generate enough surplus energy to function and support everything else we need energy for, like industry, transport, heating?
Right, the whole economy.
And what's truly insightful here, or perhaps contentious sometimes in public discussions, is the EROI for 100% renewable systems.
Yes, I've heard debates about that.
Some studies have raised concerns, suggesting potentially low EROI for systems with very high shares of variable renewables, VRE, like wind and solar, questioning if it's a risky path.
Wow.
However, this study points to previous research folks like Diesendorf and Wiedemann, Rage et al., Solomon et al., which suggests that actually 100% renewable energy is techno-economically feasible. And importantly, with EROI levels often remaining above 10.
Above 10.
Yeah, and the study also builds on earlier work by Sahin and others, which found that leading global energy transition models generally don't predict EROI falling below 10.
That value of 10 seems key then, doesn't it?
It is. It's often called the net energy cliff.
The cliff, right.
The point below which an energy system might really struggle to produce enough net energy to run society effectively. Think of it like trying to run a business where your operating costs almost equal your revenue. There's just no profit left over to invest or grow or even survive a downturn.
Yeah, you're just treading water.
Oh.
Or sinking. So staying well above 10 is a big deal for long-term viability.
It's a very big deal.
Okay, so this study is specifically set out to examine how this spatial representation, this map drawing detail, impacts the system-wide EROI.
That was the core goal, yes.
They used a sophisticated energy system model like a super smart simulator, right, specifically for Europe, and then they added a new tool to track the EROI itself.
Correct. The LUT Energy System Transition Model paired with a new LUT EROI model.
And why Europe?
Well, Europe offered a great real-world laboratory. It has a very uneven distribution of energy resources, lots of wind in the north, lots of sun in the south.
Makes sense.
It already has a highly interconnected grid, but also distinct regions, and there's a strong political push towards net zero CO2 emissions, meaning a willingness to adopt new technologies. So it was a good test case.
Okay, so how do they set up the comparison?
They looked at 6 distinct energy transition scenarios for Europe, and these were categorized mainly by how detailed their map of Europe was. They compared 2 main approaches.
Right, you mentioned nodes earlier.
Exactly. First, the multi-node scenarios. These are more detailed, aiming to be closer to reality. Think of this as breaking Europe down into 20 separate regions or zones.
20 zones, okay.
Within that, they had 2 versions, one called independent regions. Here, those 20 regions act like isolated energy islands, no connections between them. This shows the impact of, well, operating completely alone.
Like 20 mini-Europes energy-wise.
Kind of, yeah. Then the interconnected scenario. Same 20 subregions, but now they're linked by high-voltage, direct current HVDC transmission lines. Big power cable.
Ah, so energy can flow between them.
Precisely. This represents a much closer approximation to how Europe's grid actually works, or could work even better in the future, allowing energy to flow where it's needed most.
Okay, so detailed models, isolated versus connected. What was the other approach?
The other approach used single-node scenarios. These are the more aggregated, less detailed ones we talked about. Here, Europe is represented as just one large combined energy blob.
The blob model.
Yeah.
Got it.
And within these single-node models, they also tweaked some other factors. Things like whether they forced older wind power plants to be replaced sooner, that's wind forcing or WF, or not, NWF, and whether they used older or newer estimates for technology costs, just to check robustness.
So multiple aggregated views too. And the main focus was how these different spatial setups, detailed versus blob, change the EROI picture.
Exactly. How does the level of spatial detail change the physical ERI trends? That was the key question.
Okay, so let's get to it. What did they find? Did the map drawing make a difference?
Oh, absolutely. The findings were really quite revealing.
Okay.
Now, first off, all scenarios, regardless of how they were modeled, detailed, or aggregated, showed the same broad direction of travel.
Which was?
A clear shift towards solar PV becoming dominant, wind power also increasing significantly, and naturally, fossil fuels phasing out pretty dramatically. Coal power hits zero by 2050 in all scenarios.
Okay, so renewables win, fossils lose. No surprise there, maybe.
Not fundamentally, no. Gas technologies stick around, below 5%, mainly for balancing the grid, but they shift from fossil gas to things like biomethane and e-methane. But the real game changer uncovered here is how these models can actually, well, hide the true cost and complexity of getting there.
Hide the cost. How?
What was truly striking was the profound impact on energy storage needs.
Storage, okay.
The study found that the spatial representation, how detailed the map was, had a more significant impact on storage needs than any other factor they looked at. More than cost assumptions, more than wind forcing.
Wow.
Really?
More significant.
Yes. For instance, remember the independent regions scenario? The 20 isolated islands?
Yeah.
That required substantially more methane gas storage. We're talking 218 terawatt hours by 2050.
That sounds like a lot.
It is.
Right.
Compare that to the interconnected regions scenario, same 20 regions but linked up. That needed only 171 terawatt hours.
Still a lot, but significantly less.
Yeah. Significantly. It highlights how isolation, not being able to share resources, forces you to build much more local storage to cope. And here's the kicker. The aggregation process. treating Europe as one big blob.
Yeah.
By smoothing out all the local ups and downs in wind and sun across that vast area, it essentially conceals and mostly minimizes the true requirement for key enabling technologies like storage.
Ah, the smoothing effect masks the need for storage.
Precisely, which is a critical hidden cost if we're relying on those aggregated models for planning.
Okay, that's a huge aha moment right there.
Yeah.
So this smoothing effect has a direct impact on storage estimates. If you model Europe as one big bucket, you're massively underestimating storage needs because you're artificially blending out the local reality.
You're averaging away the problem spots.
And that must affect the cost estimates too, right? The levelized cost of electricity, the LCOE.
Directly. The aggregated scenarios, the blob models, they showed lower LCOE overall. Partly because renewables are getting cheaper, yes, but also because they benefited from this underestimation of system requirements caused by aggregation. They didn't account for all the storage and flexibility actually needed.
So they looked cheaper partly because they were missing costs.
In effect, yes. Conversely, the more realistic multi-node scenarios, especially the independent regions one, had relatively higher LCOE. And a significant chunk of that higher cost was storage, growing from just 2% of the LCOE early on to up to 24% by 2050 in the more detailed models.
24%. Just for storage, that's huge.
It reflects the larger storage capacity requirements when you model the system more realistically.
Okay, so this ties directly into the ERI findings then.
Absolutely directly. The study found EROI trends are highly dependent on that spatial representation, but also technology choices and the overall energy mix. Generally, EROI initially increases as you add cheap renewables.
Makes sense.
But then, as you push for really high shares of VRE, you need more and more complementary stuff, especially storage, but also things like grid reinforcements and managing curtailment.
Curtailment.
Yeah.
That's when you have too much renewable power and just have to waste it.
Right. Essentially, yes. You can't use it or store it all. And adding all these enabling technologies plus dealing with curtailment eventually starts to drive the overall system EROI back down.
Okay, so there's a peak EROI somewhere in the transition.
It appears so. The study suggests this decline starts after passing a certain threshold, maybe around 40–50% VRE penetration for the aggregated scenarios, and possibly even a bit lower for the more detailed multi-node scenarios.
Interesting. And how did the EROI values themselves compare between the models?
This is where it gets really eye-opening. What really jumped out was that the aggregated scenarios, the blob models, showed EROI values between 18 and 24 by 2050.
18 to 24, that sounds fantastic. Well above that cliff of 10.
It does sound good, right? Very healthy. But the study concludes this higher EROI in those aggregated scenarios is largely due to that same artificial smoothing effect. It masks the real energy investments needed for all that flexibility and balancing that a real-world high VRE system requires. The energy cost of building and maintaining storage, beefier grids, etc.
So it's an artificially inflated EROI because the model isn't capturing all the energy inputs needed.
That's the argument, yes. Stepping back, what this implies is quite significant. Remember the independent regions scenario, the 20 isolated islands.
Yep, the least efficient one.
That resulted in the lowest EROI, around 14 by 2050.
Still above 10, but much lower than 1824.
Much lower. And that's because isolation limits optimal resource use. Each region has to overbuild capacity and storage to meet its own demand, even if its neighbors have surplus power. It's inherently less efficient from an energy investment perspective.
Okay, but what about the interconnected one, the more realistic, detailed model?
When those same 20 sub-regions were interconnected with HVDC lines, allowing power sharing. Yeah.
The EROI increased significantly, up to 17 by 2050.
So 14 isolated, 17 interconnected, and 1824 in the aggregated blob model.
That's the pattern. It clearly demonstrates how transmission interconnections make the whole system more efficient from a net energy perspective. You share resources, reduce the need for redundant local capacity and storage, and get a better return on your total energy investment.
So the less detailed models give us a more optimistic but potentially less accurate picture of EROI. Higher number, but maybe not reflecting the real-world challenges.
That seems to be the key takeaway. The study does show that as VRE penetration increases, EROI eventually starts to decline due to needing more storage and dealing with curtailment. That relationship is fundamental.
But the smoothing effect in the aggregated models masks the extent of that decline.
Exactly. It pushes the apparent EROI higher than it might be in a more granularly modeled system. Though it's really important to stress, as the study does, that even in the most challenging realistic scenarios they modeled, like the interconnected multi-node one.
Yeah. The physical ERI values remained consistently above 14 throughout the transition, and always well above that net energy cliff value of 10.
Okay, that's crucial context. So even the more realistic, potentially harder path still looks feasible from an EROI perspective.
Yes. The study concludes the transition to 100% renewables can be achieved from a techno-economic point of view based on these ERI results. The issue isn't feasibility itself, but rather that aggregated models might underestimate the effort and investment required, particularly in flexibility options like storage and transmission.
Got it. Feasible, but maybe harder work than the simpler models suggest.
That's a good way to put it.
Did they look at anything else besides the overall ERI?
Yes, they also looked at something called the Annual Energy Investment Flow, or AEF.
AEF.
Yeah.
What does that tell us?
It's useful because it helps identify critical points or bottlenecks in the transition. It links the upfront energy needed to build new infrastructure, the investment, to when that infrastructure actually starts producing energy.
Okay, so it tracks the energy invested year by year.
Essentially, yes, relative to the energy consumed. And what really stood out in the AEF analysis was how much smoother and more predictable the investment flows looked in the multi-node models, the detailed ones.
Smoother how?
They remain below 10% of the final electricity consumption across the entire transition period, without any really big anomalous jumps or dips, a relatively steady investment pathway.
Okay. And the aggregated models?
The single-node aggregated scenarios, they showed significant fluctuations in this ADF over the years.
Fluctuation, like investment booms and busts.
Sort of, mostly driven by large, lumpy capacity expansions for certain technologies needed at specific times according to the model. For example, they saw a steep decline in AEF between 2020 and 2025, linked to a modeled need for more gas turbines to quickly replace fossil fuels before renewables fully ramped up.
Interesting.
But even with these fluctuations, the AEF in the aggregated model still generally remained below 11% of final electricity consumption.
So still manageable overall, but more volatile.
Yes, and this volatility isn't just a number. It suggests that more accurate, detailed modeling might provide a clearer, less volatile roadmap for infrastructure investment. That's vital for long-term planning, for industry, for avoiding costly surprises or delays. It just corroborates the main finding. Spatial representation does create deviations, not just in EROI, but in how the investment flows look too.
Right, so the level of detail really matters for planning the rollout.
It seems so. And finally, they did one more check. Sensitivity.
Sensitivity to what?
They investigated how sensitive the EROI estimates are to changes in the assumed energy cost of getting fossil fuels in the first place, the embodied energy demand.
So how much energy it takes to extract and process oil or gas.
Exactly. Because that's part of the energy invested side of the EROI calculation, especially early in the transition or for backup systems.
And what do they find there?
A key insight. Even relatively small changes in these upstream energy requirements for fossil fuels can cause noticeable deviations in the overall system EROI.
Really? Even small changes?
Particularly in scenarios that retain higher shares of fossil fuels for longer or rely on them for balancing. For instance, they tried using dynamic decline functions for gas and oil, basically assuming it gets harder, takes more energy to extract them over time, which is realistic.
Right.
Compared to using fixed energy costs, this dynamic approach initially yielded slightly higher EROI, because early extraction is easier, but then showed a sharper decline later on as extraction theoretically becomes more energy intensive.
So the assumptions about fossil fuel energy costs matter quite a bit.
They do, and guess which scenario was most vulnerable?
Let me guess. The independent regions one. The isolated islands.
Spot on. Because it's already less efficient due to isolation and needs more balancing, it showed the highest vulnerability to these changes in fossil fuel embodied energy.
So if it gets harder to extract the backup gas, that scenario's EROI could drop closer to that cliff.
Potentially, yes. If the energy needed to get fossil fuels increases significantly, that scenario could see its EROI fall even closer to, or maybe even below, that critical value of 10 later in the transition. It really highlights that even when renewables are dominating electricity generation, a continued reliance on, say, natural gas for balancing can create these EROI vulnerabilities. It shows how sensitive the whole calculation can be to factors often simplified in models.
Wow. Okay, so wrapping this all up, what's the big takeaway here? This deep dive into the impact of spatial representation in energy transition modeling on system-wide energy return on investment, quite a mouthful. It seems to have revealed something pretty profound.
I think so.
The very way we model our energy future, specifically how detailed our map is, can create this artificial smoothing effect.
Mm-hmm.
And that effect can paint a picture of higher EROI values and lower system costs than might be realistic, potentially leading to overly optimistic expectations about how easy or cheap this transition will be.
Exactly. That sums it up well. While achieving a 100% renewable energy system for Europe is shown to be techno-economically feasible, the ERI stays above 14, well above the cliff, even in the more realistic
Right,
scenarios.
that's key. It is feasible.
It is feasible, but the devil is truly in the details of that spatial representation. The more realistic multi-node models, especially the interconnected ones, they provide a more accurate, albeit sometimes more challenging view. A view of the true energy investments needed, especially for storage and transmission, to build a robust and reliable high renewable system. It's really about understanding the real complexities so we can plan effectively for a resilient future, not just planning based on an idealized, smoothed out version.
Which leads to a really important question for you, our curious listener, to think about. How might an awareness of these modeling biases, this smoothing effect, influence things? Not just our technical energy planning and the specific technologies we choose, but also our political decisions, our cross-country collaborations, especially when we need to work together to build that interconnected grid that the study shows is so beneficial for EROI. How do we ensure we're planning based on the more accurate, if more challenging, picture?
Hmm. That's a crucial point for policymakers and the public alike.
Something to definitely mull over as we all continue to learn and adapt to this energy transition. That was a true deep dive. Thank you so much for walking us through that.
My pleasure. It's fascinating work.
It really is. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to exploring more fascinating topics with you next time.